Sam here again with the Green Dumpster channel. Today I'm going to be replacing the Clockspring in my 2006 International school bus. From what I understand, it's the same in most medium duty trucks that are made by International of this era. I think it's 2006 through up through at least 2010. I'm not sure exactly the end year on that, but so when I got the bus, we drove it back from Maryland, and I noticed that the cruise control buttons here on the steering wheel, they didn't work. And so I just assumed that they had probably programmed out the cruise control for the bus, because usually on buses they program out the cruise control, I guess, so that bus drivers don't just put it on cruise control, you know, and I guess it's dangerous or whatnot. But then I went to go use the high idle function a few weeks later, and that also is controlled by the cruise control buttons, and that also did not work, as well as the self-diagnostic system that the startup procedure for the self-diagnostic is using also the cruise control buttons on the steering wheel. So that led me to believe that the Clockspring is bad, not allowing power through the wires in the Clockspring to the control buttons. So I'm planning to replace the Clockspring, and hopefully that solves the issue with the cruise control, the high idle, and the self-diagnostic, so I can use all three functions, which will be very convenient between cold startups in the wintertime when I should be traveling in the bus. Cruise control will be very convenient for the long drives across the country that I'm going to make with the bus, and the self-diagnostic should I ever have any problems and the check engine light come on. So with that, we'll get started taking it apart. The first step is to get this cover off, which on the back of the wheel there are 4 holes that have tabs that are supposed to be released to pop this cover off. So I'll get those off, and then I can show you guys underneath here how those tabs work. But the instructions that came with the Clockspring say to use a Phillips head screwdriver into the 4 holes on the back, back in here. I have yet to figure out how, but we will get there, and I will let you guys know how it went. So to get this cover off right here, you have to insert a screwdriver into these 4 holes on the back here, and then there's these 4 tabs that are kind of like hooks, and these engage these little springs right here. And so the screwdriver, if you can see it right here, you push the tab off to the side and then kind of pull up just a smidge on the cover, and then you just have to get all 4 corners raised up. So sometimes you'll accidentally pop one back in and have to pull up again, but it's not too hard. And then the next step will be removing this nut, which is a 1 1/4" socket. Put it on there. Make sure that the steering wheel is straight and that the wheels are straight, so that whenever you remove this nut, you can make a mark on it. And then when you place the Clockspring on, it's supposed to have the wheels straight so that it's set with this label, and then you can break the label. But we'll get to that step. But the next step is taking this nut off, mark it, and then we'll get to the steering wheel puller step. So the next step is to hold the wheel straight like this. Put your impact and socket on there. It's just easier to use an impact, so that way you're not trying to wrestle the wheel holding it straight, and then you just hold it like that, and nut comes right off. And then set that aside and take your marker and make a mark so you can see this mark lines up with this mark down here, so that we can get it back lined up the way it needs to be. And then unplug this little plug right here, pull those off to the side, and then you'll get your steering wheel puller set out, and you got to find the correct bolts that thread into the holes. It looks like the 5/16 by 3 24 looks like it should thread in just fine. So you assemble this like so, and then you thread this portion down in the middle, and it'll press on the shaft, pulling the wheel off. So make sure you get these bolts about the same amount down in there so that you're pulling straight off on the steering wheel, because you don't want this, you don't want it to be like crooked like that. So you want them pulling pretty straight. And my steering wheel puller is just a half inch hex, and you just crank it down and it pulls the steering wheel off. So it looks like it's loose, so then it just wiggles out, and then make sure you fish your wires back down through, and then you can just remove the steering wheel puller. And here's the clock spring right there. You can see those look the same, so we should be good to go with the rest of the installation. Okay, so the next step was removing this cover, the bottom piece, and then here's the top piece. I just used a T30 Torx bit and removed the 3 that are in the bottom, obviously those 3 holes. And then you saw the old clock spring was right here, and I just removed it using these 3 Phillips head screws. So now the next step is to take the new clock spring, and then you plug it into the back like that, and then slide it over the shaft, and then get it lined up with the 3 holes for these Phillips head screws, and reinstall the clock spring. And then once the clock spring's reinstalled, you can go and replace the cover that surrounds it. There is a label on the clock spring. You can see it pretty well on this one, and it's broken, which that's what it does. It holds the clock spring in the correct position so that whenever the steering wheel is straight, it lines up properly. And whenever you install it, make sure you have the label on there, and whenever you go to turn for the first time, it'll break the label. It just makes sure that originally it is in the correct spot. And then now I'll just reinstall these covers, and then we'll get back to putting the steering wheel back on. So in the time lapse, you saw me putting this bottom cover back on, putting the wheel back on, and I fed the wires through this right slot in the wheel. And then you can see I got my mark here lined back up with that mark, so that I know that the steering wheel's back where it's supposed to be. So then the next step is to put these back in. Oops, that's upside down. Put these back in, and they just pop down in like so. And then I can plug this plug back into here. Once this is plugged back in, you can put the nut back on. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know the torque spec, so I'm just gonna give it a couple of little, and it should be tight enough. And then plug the horn button back in, and this installation should be done. Just tuck all the wires back, and that's clipped back in.
All right, I finished up the clock spring replacement, and I've taken it for a drive since I did the clock spring to check to see if the cruise control worked, and it did. So now we'll start it up and we'll check the high idle. So to turn on the high idle, you hit the on button on the cruise control, and then you hold the resume accelerate button until you reach the RPM that you desire. And then it'll idle at that RPM until you hit the off button on the cruise control right here, or if you hit the brake pedal. If you hit the brake pedal, it'll turn it off. High idle only works when you're in park and the shifter is in neutral. that should conclude the high idle and cruise control. So now to do the self-diagnostic, I believe, yep, you just hit that and then it shows you the fault codes, which 2 of my fault codes are for the traction control and ABS, and 2 of them are for the heated mirrors, which were removed off of the front. So that's not too shocking. I need to address the traction control and ABS, but I just haven't gotten to that point yet because it still drives and stops fine and everything. So, yep, that should be all that you need to know for this video. I appreciate y'all watching. I appreciate y'all subscribing. Let me know what I can do better, different, whatever in the comments. If there's anything else you wanted to know, let me know. And I really just appreciate you guys and everything that y'all do.